Bible class hour. We're going to continue our study of the life of Christ. We only have the rest of this quarter till we get finished. There are some lesson sheets in the back if you would like some. We're going to pick up today really where we left off last week, and there's only a few slides to cover from last week's slides. And so the first 3 or 4 things we say are not going to be on your notes for today. They're on last week's notes. But we have a lot to cover today. We're going to be going over to Mark 12, so you want to put a finger in that text. We're going to be in Mark 12, we're going to be in John 12, we're going to be in Matthew 24 and Matthew 25. And so if you kind of want to put a place card in some of those as you're turning through the text today, we have several things to cover in the life of Christ. And some of this is actually going to be debated which day it falls on, because there are some people that differ on which day some of this falls off. But we're still in the early part of the week, of the final week before the crucifixion, is where we're still at in our text. And so here in Mark chapter 12, in verses 41 through 44, we're going to talk about Jesus. He's going to take a look at the giving that's taking place at the temple. And so starting there in verse 41 of Mark chapter 12, we see that Jesus sat opposite the treasury and saw how the people put money into the treasury, and many who were rich put in much. Then one poor widow came and threw in 2 mites, which make quadrans. And I want to pause there, because here in 2 verses, if you just read these 2 verses, you're going to read something, and maybe if you kind of move yourself out of the context of what's going on, maybe you judge the same way that every other man would judge. Maybe you look at this and you say, look at this, here are all these people and these men that are coming, and they're placing much in the treasury because they're rich and they have a lot. And then you have this other woman that comes up and she places in such a small amount, and maybe it's easy to jump to conclusions immediately and just say, she sure didn't give a whole lot. These other people are giving in abundance and she's not giving a lot. And maybe it's easy if you just pull these 2 verses out of their context to do what so many others were doing there in the text itself. That they were there and they were judging. They were judging someone's gift and what they were giving based on a monetary denomination, instead of basing it on the fact that this woman's gift might have just been all that she had. And in fact, we're going to see the value of her gift here in a moment. But I want us to just take a look right out of the gate that here is the problem. The problem is that what we call a great gift and what God calls a great gift is not always the same. What we say is a sacrifice and what God says is a sacrifice is not always the same. And I want us to take that and to apply that not only into our giving, but into our lives. We are to be, as Romans 12 talks about, we're to be, living sacrifices. I think that we can take that and to, yes, apply that to our giving, but what about to our lives and the way we live for Him? So keep that in mind as we finish the rest of this text here in Mark chapter 12, because it says, so he called his disciples to him and said to them, assuredly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all those who have given to the treasury. For they all put in out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty put in all that she had, her whole livelihood. See, that changes the story, drastically. See, here, the assumption might have been that they gave such a great amount and they are more righteous, or they are more spiritual, or they are more connected with God, however you want to say it. And yet, what Jesus says when he looks at this gift is, she gave more than they did. Not monetarily, but sacrificially. She gave from a place of the heart, and she gave from a place out of her poverty, and she gave of all that she had. And that is the way that we are not only to just give, to the Lord, but we are to live for the Lord. I think that this sacrificial kind of giving also applies to a sacrificial kind of living. And that is the way that we as people, we need to live each and every day for God. And that's the way we need to give each, especially on the Lord's Day, for God, out of a place of true sincerity, of true heart, not of a place just of abundance and what's left over. Sometimes it can be easy when you have abundance to just throw money away. Recently we referenced the fact that I think someone won a great deal of money in one of the major lotteries. I'm not saying what's going to happen with that individual. I'm saying what has happened with most individuals that have ever won something like that. Most of them waste it. Most of them end up in a worse financial situation than they were to begin with. So a lot of people will say it's the worst thing that ever happened to them to win all that great deal of money, because in the end, it changes their life forever, and it's not for the good. Now, I don't think we should be participating in the lottery anyway, but the reality is as we look at this, we see it's not great abundance and financial wealth. It's going to bring happiness and it's going to secure righteousness. What's going to do that is God. It's us being obedient and pleasing before Him. So here this widow, here she is, and it says that she gave more than all the rest, for they all put in out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty put in all that she had, her whole livelihood. I want you to understand this. Jesus retired to the court of women where the treasury was located. According to Alfred Edersheim, the treasury consisted of 13 trumpet-shaped containers. You can see pictures and stuff if you look on a website. The money placed in each was used for different temple functions, sacrifices, upkeep, etc. The containers each had a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet to determine which temple function they were for. These were for voluntary offerings on special occasions, such as feast days. Many would come and make these free will offerings. He saw many rich come and give bountifully. We have to wonder what Jesus thought as he watched the rich give. Was he happy or was he disappointed? But he was touched by the widow. He was touched by her offering. Widows were considered the most defenseless and helpless segment of their society. God has special laws to protect widows. You can see that in Exodus 22 and Deuteronomy chapter 24. The New Testament also reflects this thought as well in Acts chapter 6 and James chapter 1. Most widows were poor, and Mark and Luke specifically call this widow poor. These two small copper coins that she gave, the Greek is lepta, a plural of lepton. Lepton is the only Jewish coin mentioned in the New Testament. How much were they worth? Some versions say it's worth a cent. Other versions say a penny or less than a penny. The Greek word for cent or penny is quadrant, which was a Roman coin worth about 1/64th of a denarius. A denarius is a day's wage. So the widow gave 2 of these coins, or 1/32nd of a day's wage. We found out later that this was all she had, for she was very poor. 1/32nd of a day's wage. That's not a whole lot. I mean, even if you work an 8-hour day and you're making minimum wage of, I don't know what minimum wage is, what, $7.25, something like that? Say it again? Minimum wage, you may know? Okay, it don't matter. But I mean, you're talking about $50, $60. You're not talking about a lot, and that's our day and time. $50, $60, you take a 1/32nd of that, you're not talking about a whole lot of money, and probably talking about just cents that's being given here. And yet, she gave out of her poverty, and she gave all that she had. You notice this. This is what Jesus is going to do. What he's going to do with a simple lesson like this, it says in verse 43 that he called his disciples to himself and said to them. You see, this is going to be a moment of teaching. This is going to be also a moment of learning. I think many times if we stop and we'll slow down enough, that if we'll focus in on the text, we can see that there are lots of moments of teaching and learning that can be done and that can be experienced if we will listen to the word and listen to what it's trying to say. So here, Jesus is going to call his disciples to him. He said the widow put in more than everyone else who was giving. The Greek is constructed to say that she put in more than all the rich put together. So it wasn't just more than one, it was more than all. In man's eyes, her gift was insignificant, but in God's eyes, her gift was priceless. This widow has inspired people for over 2,000 years to give. Just think of how much giving her story and sacrifice has encouraged. Now, for us today, I want us to take this lesson and this story and apply it. So yes, here in just 4 verses, as it is accounted here in Mark chapter 12, we see a story of a widow that gave a very small amount monetarily, but that gave all she had sacrificially. We know that we all should give, whether rich or poor or for somewhere in between. We also know that God views things differently than we view things. We might look at the giving on any particular time, and we might be guilty of judging the way that mankind judged here in Mark 12. But instead, we should be looking at this in the way God looks at it. Our giving should be sacrificial. Our giving should reflect the fact that our trust is in God, not gold. God cares not just about the portion, but the proportion. The main point is that Jesus is watching us as he watched the widow. And that's a statement that can be said not just in our giving, but also in our life. Jesus is always there, and he's always watching, and he's always knowing, and not just as a person that is our judge, but as a loving Savior that died for us all. Someone that sacrificed truly the ultimate sacrifice. And he asked us in return also to be sacrificial. And I think that that's something we can consider not only for our life, but also for our giving. Jesus sees everything. We see that in 2 Chronicles chapter 16 and verse 9. For the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the earth. Proverbs 5:21, the ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he watches all his paths. Proverbs 15 and verse 3, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, watching the evil and the good. Hebrews 14 verse 13, and there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are open and laid bare to the eyes of him with whom we have to do. God sees. He sees our giving. He sees our lives. He saw the hypocritical giving of Ananias and Sapphira, and he was displeased in Acts chapter 5 in verses 1 through 11. He saw the sacrificial giving of the Macedonians, and he was pleased in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 in verses 1 through 5. The Lord scrutinized the giving in the temple 2,000 years ago, and he is still viewing us from heaven. What does Christ see when he looks at our giving? What does Christ see when he looks at our lives? Remember, Christ is not just looking at the gift, but at the giver. And that is something for us all to consider as we give and as we live for him. I said today we have a lot to cover, and so now we're going to move on to John chapter 12, and we're going to discuss a sermon that is about to take place. And some people would say this is one of his last public sermons here before he is crucified. One of his last public lessons that we have here recorded before he is taken up. We do not know for sure this was his last sermon, but in John chapter 12, we're going to start in verse 20 today. But it's very possible that this is his last public discourse. Some believe that this text may have happened on Monday, which is why I said earlier that some of the things we're covering this today have some differing thoughts on what day it occurred. But there are many also that believe that this happened on Tuesday, right after Jesus observed the widow giving all that she had. And that's why we're covering it today. It's possible this took place on Monday, but here in the text, for today, since we're using John's text, we're going to cover it right after her giving all that she had. And one of the reasons we're doing that is because this is the only incident recorded by John between the triumphant entry on Sunday and the Last Supper that we see coming up. So our scene starts with a group of Greeks coming to Philip, asking to see Jesus. And we're going to see that in John chapter 12, starting there, verse 20. And it says, "Now there were certain Greeks among those who came up to worship at the feast. And they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and asked him, saying, 'Sir, we wish to see Jesus.'" Now, if this was you and this was me, how would we respond? I think I'd be pretty excited. I'd be pretty excited if I was, just going into town and I was maybe going to get something to eat or stopping to get some gas, and somebody walked up to me and said, "Can you tell me about Jesus?" I think I'd be pretty excited about that. If Jesus was physically walking around this earth today and I happened to be one of his close disciples, I think I'd been pretty excited if somebody walked up to me and said, "Hey, can you take us to see Jesus?" I'd be like, "Yes, let's go." But there's more to this story than maybe sometimes we considered. Is when you talk about the disciples, and you talk about what they were doing and who they were serving, the disciples primarily at this point in time are taking the word of Jesus out to the Jews. They're not taking it out to all the Greeks. They're not taking it out to all the Gentile nations. They're primarily taking it out to the Jews. And so Philip did not know what to do because here are these Greeks coming to Philip. They're asking to see Jesus. So Jesus had told the 12 not to go to the Gentiles yet, but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. That's Matthew chapter 10 and verses 5 through 6. And so Philip, as we're going to see, he's going to go to Andrew, and then they're both going to go to Jesus here in a moment. It says Philip came to Andrew, verse 22, and in turn Andrew and Philip told Jesus. And then Jesus is going to respond, and this is where we get into the sermon portion of this text. He's going to have a great response, and some are going to say, well, Jesus' response ignores the question. Some are going to say that Jesus is, not concerned over these Greeks. He doesn't care about these Greeks. I think we know our God better than that, and I think we know Jesus better than that. He's going to use this as a moment. He's going to use this as a turning point, the point towards something that is great. The Greeks are going to have their opportunity, and the Greeks are going to have their moment. We don't know for sure if he ever went and met with these Greeks face to face. But the Greeks were getting ready to have their moment, and they're going to have their time. We see here within this text that Jesus is going to focus on something, and I want us to kind of just say this and kind of set the scene there in verse 23. But Jesus answered them, saying, "The hour has come, the Son of Man should be glorified." When we look at that and we see that this is his response, that this is the beginning of his response to the statement, "Here are some people that want to see you." And he turns this situation, he turns the conversation towards something that is so very important. Not that seeing them was not important, but he said the hour has come. Specifically, that the hour has come, the Son of Man should be glorified. We see the Son of Man referenced in Daniel chapter 7 and verse 13, which also refers to the Messiah here in verse 23. But to be glorified, verse 23, not glorified in the way the crowd would expect, but glorified in a way that was what God intended. Let's go ahead and dive into the text a little farther, and we're going to read verses 23 all the way down through verse 26. It says, "But Jesus answered them, saying that the hour has come, the Son of Man should be glorified. Most assuredly I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain. He who loves his life will lose it. He who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life. If anyone serves me, let him follow me, and where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, him my Father will honor." Here we're going to look at something within this. We're going to talk about him being glorified in a way that, as we said, the crowd did not expect. What the crowd expected, honestly, was when Jesus came into town, they were expecting the triumphant entry of a king that was going to establish an earthly kingdom, of a king that was going to reign and rule forever in the kingdoms of men, of a king that might have led them into military conflict, into a king that was going to serve them just like the kings of ancient times had served. If you remember at the conclusion of Judges and coming into the period of the United Kingdom, it was the people that requested to have a king. They always had wanted a king. Why do they want a king? Why do they want a physical king? Because that's what everybody else had in the Old Testament. Here they wanted a king because they saw that the biggest threat to them at the time were kingdoms of men. Not the forces of evil, not Satan, not sin. But the reality is they needed more than an earthly king. They needed the Son of Man. They needed the Son of God. They needed a kingdom that was heavenly, not a kingdom that was earthly. They needed something that was far better. And so here they are, and what they are expecting is this earthly king and that kind of entry. They're expecting a king that's going to be glorified, and maybe he's going to have the palace, and maybe he's going to have all the robes, and maybe he's going to have all the riches that this world has to offer. That is the kind of glory that a lot of people would have expected for the king to have. But Jesus is going to come poor, and Jesus is going to be a servant. And as we know what's going to happen later in this week, Jesus is going to die on the cross. That is not the image that people had in their mind of the glorified king that was to come. But that is what Jesus was. That's what he is. And so as we look at this, I want us to understand that here you're going to have many things that are not going to be what they necessarily wanted or desired. Notice that a grain of wheat must die to bear fruit. The same thing was going to happen to Jesus. He was going to die and others were going to be blessed by it. The only way he could bring new life was to give his life up through death. The only way we're going to have life, true life, is to give our life up too. To give our life up to sin, to give our life up to selfishness, to give our life up to the ways of this world, to truly be buried with him in baptism, to truly rise up and walk in newness of life. We're given that opportunity because that's what Christ did for us. That's what he was about to do here for all of mankind. And we need to see the importance of this, that as Jesus is here and as he is looking, he is going to be glorified in a way that they never expected. He's going to be glorified in a place that was seen as a place of shame. He was going to be glorified in a place that was seen in a place of mockery, seen as a place of criminals, seen as a place that you never wanted to go and you never wanted your family to go. He was going to be taken to a cross, and he was going to be glorified on that tree because he was the Son of God, that precious lamb, that he died for you and me. That is what we see when we look here within this text, that Jesus is going to be glorified in numerous ways. He was going to be glorified by the Father. We see here within this that we must love our lives less than and keep doing the Lord's will. Hate means to love less. The only way to truly live is to die, referencing Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20. We are to live those crucified lives, those lives that have been put away with. And the true ownership of our life is to be found in Christ Jesus. He provides here within this text great motivation to serve him. Let's read verse 26 here again. If anyone serves me, let him follow me. And where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, him my Father will honor. Imagine being honored by God himself. Imagine that kind of glory. See, in this life today, as a Christian, we might not receive honor from men. Instead, we might receive ridicule. They might try to put us to shame. They might try to take us to court. They might try to put us in prison. They might even lead us to our eventual death. Many Christians at other times have faced similar things like that. They have faced death. They have faced ridicule. They have faced things just like Jesus would have faced. Different types of persecutions and scourgings and crucifixions. There's still glory to be had. Because that glory was going to come from God. And who can offer better glory than God himself? Is it mankind whom he created? Or is it God who sustains us and who holds the whole world in his hands? God can give far greater glory than this world can ever offer. He can offer far greater riches than this world can ever offer. And so if we're going to seek after glory and honor from any person or anything, we're seeking after it after God. Now, how is it obtained? It's obtained through obedience. It's obtained through sacrificial living. It's obtained through humility. Us humbling ourselves under the mighty hand of God. So what? So that he can exalt us. So that he can lift us up. Not so that we can lift ourselves up. So that he can be the one that glorifies us. So that he can be the one that calls us his own. We look continually in this text in John chapter 12, verses 27 through 30. And it reads, "My soul is troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. But for this purpose I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came from heaven saying, "I have both glorified it and will glorify it again." Therefore the people who stood by and heard it said it had thundered. Others said, "An angel has spoken to him." Jesus answered and said, This voice did not come because of me, but for your sake." John did not record Jesus in Gethsemane, but he still gives us a glimpse into Christ's heart. Here is the Christ. And he offers up a sincere thought, of a sincere question, of something that is similar to the prayer that he's going to offer up in Gethsemane, of a similarity to the Lord, let this cup pass from me. Not my will, but thine be done. A similar thought that is had here within this text is recorded here in John, and it's a beautiful thought. He says, "My soul has become troubled," John 12:27. Christ knew what lay ahead for him, all the terrible things. Notice this, he was a man just like you and I are. He was flesh and blood. What does that mean? It means he had choices. He had choices just like he had when he was tempted by Satan himself. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been a temptation. Here was Satan tempting him himself. He had choices he could have made, but he didn't. They didn't take his life. He gave it up. So here we see within this text, he says, "My soul has become troubled." Christ knew what was lying ahead. Christ had a choice. He even says, "What shall I say?" or "What should I pray for?" He was saying, should he ask the Father to save him or not? The emphatic answer of no is found in John chapter 12, verse 27. He says, "But for this purpose I came to this hour." He knew what he was here for. He knew what he was all about. The same statement that's very similar to what he said as a young boy when replying to his own mother. "Did you not know I must be about my Father's business?" He's been about the Father's business his entire life. He knew the pain, he knew the agony, he knew the sorrow and the grief and everything that was going to come along with it. But yet he did so, for this is what he was sent for. And his obedience to God is a testimony not only of him but what we are to be in him. Notice this, that in this, verse 28, Christ's confirmation, he says, "Father, glorify your name." And God's confirmation, in the latter part of verse 28, "I have both glorified it and will glorify it again." During Jesus' ministry, God spoke from heaven 3 times: at his baptism, at his transfiguration, and here. I think a lot of times we focus in on the other two, his baptism and transfiguration, and the declaration that Jesus was his son. And then with the transfiguration, not only is he his son, but that we are to hear and listen to him. Once again, here the Father speaks from heaven, saying, I have both glorified it and will glorify it again. The people's response here through this, some understood the voice and others did not. Some thought it was just a sound of thunder. God's confirmation was not only for Jesus, but for those that were there in that moment. Can you imagine how much of a turning point this can be? Here, Jesus has been approached. Here are some Greeks that want to see you, and he focuses in on the fact that the hour has come. The time has come for me to be given up. The time has come for the Son of Man to fulfill the purpose for which he was sent. This transitional sermon or lesson that is given here is something that should draw our attention, and it should have caught theirs. That things were going to be different, and if they didn't believe it with the beginning words of Jesus, now this thunderous roar that comes from heaven, whether they heard a voice or not, they knew something was about to happen. Have you ever been sitting there and watching a movie? Have you ever noticed that in the background of every movie and every TV show you watch, that there is music of some kind? And it is the music within that movie or in that show that generates this anticipation within us. That here we are and we recognize that all of a sudden something bad's gonna happen, because you know the way that soundtrack's gonna sound when something bad's about to happen. Or when something good's about to happen, you know the way the soundtrack of that movie is going to turn when something good's about to happen, or if it's suspenseful, or if it's just, drawing intrigue, whatever it is, it changes. We don't have music playing in the background of our life. At least, I don't think we do anyway. But here is this thunderous voice speaking from heaven. Here is an audibly heard sound that was going to signify something is about to happen. It's those small things that are just so beautiful about the text that make some of these stories just really come to life for us. Some of these accounts of what truly happened. We are about to see Christ be glorified, not in the way that mankind expected, but in the way that we all needed. Continuing on in verses 31 through 33, we don't have a lot of time today. 31 through 33, it says, Now is the judgment of this world. Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. And I, if I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all peoples to myself. This he said, signifying by what death he would die. As we talked about a moment ago, his glorification was going to come in a way that was not expected. Several significant things would occur when Christ died on the cross. It would appear to be a moment of defeat, but it would actually be a moment of victory. The cross would actually be a time of judgment. The world order would be judged. Satan would be defeated, cast out. The decisive battles between good and evil was fought on the cross, Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 to 15, and we know who won. Jesus Christ has won the victory. He was lifted up means the method of which he was going to die was lifted up on the cross, John chapter 12 and verse 33, and will draw all to himself, to myself. His death was not just for the Jews, but for everyone. As we said, the Greeks were going to have their moment. They were going to have their time. Notice that how Jesus will bring people to him by drawing them in, not forcing or pushing them in. And that is something for us all to recognize and to understand about our God. He still gives us choices. He still gives us opportunities. He's not forcing us in this life to do things, even though he has told us what punishment will come if we don't. He's drawing us in as a loving Father that he is, And we need to help the world see that the justice and the wrath that is to come is going to be delivered by a God that loves us so much, by Jesus that loves us so much that he sacrificed it all for us. That's the God that we serve. Continuing on in this text, John chapter 12, verse 34 through 36, he says, the people answered him, we have heard from the law that the Christ remains forever, and how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is the Son of Man? Then Jesus said to them, a little while longer, the light is with you. Walk while you have the light, lest darkness overtake you. He who walks in darkness does not know where he is going. While you have the light, believe in the light, that you may become sons of light. These things Jesus spoke and departed and was hidden from them. Here you see the crowd did not understand. They heard Christ would remain forever, and the Old Testament did not teach this, but it did teach that the Messiah would rule forever over an eternal kingdom. Isaiah 9:7, Ezekiel 37:25, and Daniel 7, verse 14. The Jews therefore concluded that the Messiah must stay forever. With the confusion, they thought perhaps he was talking about someone else. So they asked the question, who is the Son of Man? Jesus answered them indirectly by saying the Son of Man is the light of the world. Jesus appealed to the crowd. Remember, we are suspecting that this is Christ's last sermon. While you have the light, believe in the light, become sons of the light. He was telling them exactly what they needed to do. He was telling them exactly who they needed to follow. It's the same person that we need to follow today. Now we're going to leave this really powerful section of Scripture and go to another equally powerful section of Scripture. Having to change directions here in a moment's notice is kind of interesting, but we're going to Matthew chapter 24. The lesson today had a lot to do with Matthew chapter 24 and the beginning of chapter 25, and we only have about 10 minutes or so, or 7 minutes or so. Notice this. Matthew chapter 24, we can go over there together, is one of these chapters that people get greatly confused about. They don't have to get confused about it, but because of the climate that we're in, the religious climate that we're in, and all the things that people like to talk about, you hear a lot of premillennialist thoughts that are being passed around and around. I've tried to simplify this for us as best I can, but understand this, that here within the disciples' questioning and what they're going to offer up before Jesus, he's going to answer two distinctly different questions. So we need to say that right out of the gate. Matthew chapter 24, starting in verse 1, then Jesus went out and departed from the temple. So he's left his teaching. He's now going to go out of the temple. And as he's going out, his disciples came to show him the building of the temple. So I want you to imagine they're leaving the temple and they're saying, hey, look at all these stones. Look how beautiful they are. Look how ornate they are. Look at all these things. So that's just the picture we're having, that his disciples are showing him the building of the temple. But Jesus said to them, do you not see all these things? Surely I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now as he sat, so he's continuing on the journey. They've come out of the temple. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things be? And as we can see within the other passages of text, we see this is probably his closest disciples that are coming to him. Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? See, the problem is even his own disciples they're a little confused. And they don't quite understand what Jesus is talking about. See, in my mind, this is Derek's opinion here, in my mind, the only thing that they can fathom is the only way that any of this that they saw, their religious culture, was going to change at all is when the end's coming. When Christ is setting up his earthly kingdom and all these things are going to change forever. But the reality is that this is not about an earthly kingdom. This is not about him doing anything of the sort. You have two different things that are being discussed here within this text. One is going to be the destruction of Jerusalem, which is going to come upon the city, and it's going to come fast, it's going to come hard, and it's going to lay bare this great place. And so notice that he is answering them about that, and then later on he's going to answer them about his return. not about his earthly kingdom, but about his return to take his true kingdom home, to deliver it to the Father. We, as the church, are the kingdom. His kingdom has already been established. We are his kingdom. We are part of his kingdom. And so we need to understand this as we go through the text. The disciples questioned Jesus about the times in verse 3. We see there in verse 4 through 14 that he talks about the sorrows. And Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceive you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilence, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then they will deliver you up to the tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all the nations for my name's sake. And then you will be offended and will betray one another. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. And then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations. And then the end will come." Notice here, he's talking about these sorrows that are going to come about. It then goes on in verse 15. He says, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of Daniel by the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand." Then he says, "Let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is in the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. And pray that your flight may be not be in winter or in the Sabbath. For then there will be a great tribulation, which has not been seen since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor shall ever be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved." Continuing on, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Then if anyone says to you, "Look, here is the Christ," or "There," do not believe. For false Christ and false signs and wonders show great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. See, I've told you beforehand. Therefore, if I say to you, "Look, he is in the desert," do not go out. And "Look, for he is in the inner rooms," do not believe. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. For wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from the heavens, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of trumpet, and they will gather together this elect from the four corners, from the four winds, from the one end of the heaven to the other. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know the summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near at the doors. Surely I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass, but my words will by no means pass away. When I pause there, long reading, all of these things he is reading and he is pointing us to, and he talks about a sense that we need to be ready. The text here, the people he's writing to, tell them you need to be ready. Why? Because great destruction is coming. He's talking to in these earliest verses here about the destruction that it was going to come upon Jerusalem, about the need to be ready. That's why they didn't want it to be in winter. That's why they didn't want it to be in a physical sense, because when the Lord comes back in the second return, it don't matter what season it is. When he talks about here within the text that he is referring to a coming of God, he's talking about a judgment that's going to come down from God that we're seeing here happen upon this great city. But let's not get confused of what he's talking about in the latter part of this, because when we go to verse 36, after talking all these things that they were to see and to understand, were foretelling the coming of the fall of Jerusalem, about the day and hour in which he returns, his second coming, verse 36, he says, but of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven. And that is something that I want us to see here. They needed to be ready for the fall of Jerusalem. They were told to flee. They were told to get out of town and to not turn back. We need to be ready, though, for his second return. And in a very spiritual way, we need to be ready for his return. Now, unfortunately, Mr. Chris, we don't have time to go into chapter 25. I only left you 13 verses there, chapter 25. But next week, you will pick up in Matthew chapter 25. So just start there and reading your text. But I want us to see there that Matthew chapter 24, we only took a few minutes today. It's a complicated chapter, but if we focus in on what it's really talking about, then we can see the two distinct elements, destruction of Jerusalem and the second return, or the return of Christ. And that is what we all need to be ready for. Thank you.